Hello, and welcome back to the latest researches and news. Today we're covering several developments coming out of Ethiopia reports about foreign drone activity, a reported military reshuffle by Tigray People Liberation Front forces in the Raya belt, militia mobilization toward the Tigray border, and a strange story about a convicted prisoner who has reportedly gone missing from a jail in Addis Ababa. Almost none of this has been officially confirmed by any government body, so I want to walk through each piece carefully, explain the background so it makes sense even if you're new to this story, and then give you my own read on why these things might be happening. Let's get into it. The first report comes from a senior journalist who says that personnel from the United Arab Emirates are running drone operations inside Ethiopia. The main base for this activity is said to be the Debrecen Air Force compound, which sits just outside Addis Ababa. Beyond that, there are reportedly additional deployments at Beidar, Asosa, and in the Afar region. Now, why does this matter? And why should you care about a detail as small as there's a mosque inside the compound? That detail is actually a signal in itself. When a foreign military detachment builds a permanent place of worship on a base, it usually means the personnel expect to be there for an extended period. This isn't a short rotation or a one-off support mission. It looks more like a semi-permanent operational presence. So even though we can't verify troop numbers or exact mission scope, small infrastructure details like this tend to tell us more about the intended duration of a deployment than press statements do. It's also worth explaining for anyone who isn't familiar with the regional context why the United Arab Emirates would be involved in Ethiopia at all. The United Arab Emirates has had a broader interest in the Horn of Africa. For years, it operates port and logistics investments in Somaliland, has previously supported federal Ethiopian forces during the Tigray war with drone strikes, and has strategic interests tied to Red Sea shipping lanes and regional influence versus other Gulf and regional powers. So a continued or expanded drone presence would fit into a pattern that's been visible for several years now, rather than being something entirely new. That said, I want to stress, this is one journalist report, not something independently confirmed by satellite imagery or an official statement, so treat it as credible but unverified. Moving to the second story, ground sources are reporting that Tigray People Liberation Front, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, has reinforced and reorganized its forces across what's known as the Raya territory. For viewers who don't know the geography, Raya is a contested belt of land that sits in North Wollo Zone, which is administratively part of the Amhara region, but has a mixed and disputed history in terms of who actually controls and identifies with it. That's exactly why it keeps coming up in this conflict. It's a flashpoint precisely because of that ambiguity. According to the report, on July 25th, Tigray People Liberation Front carried out a reorganization across Raya Alamata, Raya Bala, Ofla, and the surrounding woredas, a woreda being roughly equivalent to a district. Newly graduated recruits were reportedly sent to reinforce frontline units in these areas. Units that had previously been stationed in Raya Alamata, Raya Bala, and Waghemra Zone were reportedly reassigned as part of this restructuring. More specifically, the report says Army 26 was moved from the Sekota, Abajele, and Berebere fronts to Korem, while Armies 43 and 44, which were already operating around Raya Bala, Kofi Goro, Adiskeng, and Besobere, reportedly received additional personnel. Here's the explanation piece. When a force reshuffles multiple named units across several fronts simultaneously, rather than just sending in fresh recruits to one location, that's usually a sign of a broader operational plan rather than routine rotation. It suggests an intent to either strengthen a defensive line, prepare for a push into new territory, or respond to an anticipated move by an opposing force. Which of those it is, we genuinely don't know from this report alone, but the fact that multiple armies are being repositioned at once rather than just reinforced in place is the detail worth paying attention to. Again, I want to be upfront. This is described as coming from ground sources, which in this kind of reporting usually means local residents, informal contacts, or partisan channels relying on what they are seeing or hearing, not a verified military intelligence assessment. So, we should treat specific unit numbers and troop movements as claims to watch for corroboration, not established fact. The third development is that the Ethiopian military is reportedly mobilizing militias and moving them toward Tigray's borders. This isn't a brand new story. About a week before this report, there was already talk of militia deployment, specifically in North Wollo. And a few days before that, there were reports of a 10-day deadline given to two fronts, instructing militias, armed groups, and both regional and federal security forces to be fully prepared for any scenario within that window. So what we're apparently seeing now is the next stage of that build-up, actual movement of militia forces toward the border, not just alerts or deadlines. There's also a claim, and I want to flag clearly, that this is a claim from opposition-aligned sources, not confirmed, that several militia members refused orders to deploy to the Tigray border, defected, and joined Fano instead, with some pictures circulating as supposed evidence. I can't verify that, and given that it comes from a source with a clear political interest in portraying defections in a certain light, I'd treat it with real caution until there is independent corroboration. Now let's get into the why here, because I think this is actually the more interesting part of the story. Why would the Ethiopian federal government need militias at all, when it already has the Ethiopian National Defense Force, federal police, special forces, Republican Guards, and regional special forces at its disposal? That's a fair question, and I think there are two reasonable explanations. First, the Ethiopian National Defense Force is simply stretched thin. It's currently committed on multiple fronts at once, fighting Fano in Amhara region, fighting the Oromo Liberation Army in Oromia, and supporting RSF-related operations in Benishangul Gumuz, on top of whatever posture it maintains on external borders, given the involvement of outside actors in Ethiopia's conflicts. No matter how many new recruits graduate from training, an army fighting on that many internal fronts simultaneously, plus maintaining external readiness, is going to have real capacity constraints. Falling back on militia support is a fairly standard way governments try to fill that gap without withdrawing regular units from other active fronts. Second, and this is more of an interpretive point, there's a political logic to using militias rather than just federal forces. If this becomes purely a fight between the federal government and Tigray People Liberation Front, it's easier for Tigray People Liberation Front to frame the conflict as centralized aggression by Addis Ababa against Tigray. But if regional militias, local forces, and ordinary regional institutions are visibly part of the mobilization, the federal government can present it instead as a broader national or regional effort against Tigray People Liberation Front, similar to the way a wide coalition of public sentiment aligned against Tigray People Liberation Front back in 2020. partly as a reaction to how the country had been governed during the EPRDF era. Building that kind of shared buy-in again, rather than fighting a war that looks like Addis Ababa versus Tigray alone, appears to be part of the political calculation here, at least based on how these mobilizations are being carried out. Now for a story that's a bit different in nature, less about troop movements and more about a mystery. A news source is reporting that the man convicted of killing Ethiopia's former chief of staff has gone missing from a prison in Addis Ababa. To understand why this matters, we need some background, so let me walk through it for anyone who isn't familiar. Back in June 2019, there was an attempted coup in the Amhara region against the regional president at the time, Ambasho Mekonnen. That coup attempt was led by Esaminu Tsage, who was head of the Amhara Regional Security Forces at the time. This detail matters for a separate reason too, as Esaminu Tsage is widely credited with having organized and given proper structure to Fano during his time running regional security, recruiting, arming, and training fighters. That's part of why Fano supporters today often refer to him as a founding figure. The coup attempt failed, Ambasho Mekonnen was killed, and Esaminu Tsage fled before being killed himself. In a related but separate incident around the same time, Ethiopia's federal chief of staff, General Seir Mekonnen, was also killed, along with a retired major general, reportedly while responding to the unfolding situation. General Mekonnen's own bodyguard, a man named Mesfin Tigabu, was accused of carrying out that killing. He was arrested, reportedly injured during the arrest, and a trial followed. One detail that generated controversy at the time was that General Mekonnen's widow said she was never called to testify or give evidence. Despite being the person who first alerted police to what happened, she gave several interviews afterward, questioning how the investigation and trial had been conducted. Ultimately, Mesfin Tigabu, who had no prior criminal record and had been part of the general's security detail, was convicted and sentenced to life in prison and has reportedly been incarcerated since 2019. Now, this new report says he's missing from that prison. What could explain that? A few possibilities exist, and it's worth explaining how prison systems generally work, so this doesn't sound more mysterious than it needs to be. Most prisons maintain small on-site medical facilities for routine care. But if an inmate needs something more serious surgery, specialist treatment, they are often transferred out to a larger facility, which could be a dedicated prison hospital, a civilian hospital, or in some cases a community hospital. So one explanation is simply a medical transfer that hasn't been publicly announced. Another possibility is an administrative transfer to a different prison facility. And the more dramatic possibility, of course, is an actual escape or unexplained disappearance. As of this report, there's been no public statement from the government confirming any of these explanations, which is part of why this story is generating attention. The ambiguity itself is notable, even setting aside sensational speculation. So, stepping back, what do these four stories have in common? On one level, they are separate events: a foreign military presence, an internal reshuffling of one faction's forces, a mobilization decision by the federal government, and an individual prisoner's disappearance. But together, they paint a picture of a security environment that's actively in motion on several fronts at once: external military cooperation continuing, an armed group repositioning in a historically contested area, a government trying to widen its base of military support ahead of a possible escalation, and unresolved questions about accountability from a 5-year-old political killing still surfacing today. I want to end with the same caveat I opened with. Almost everything in this video comes from ground sources, a single journalist, or unverified regional reporting, not official government statements or independently confirmed intelligence. That doesn't mean it should be dismissed, but it does mean it should be treated as developing information rather than settled fact. We'll keep tracking these stories and bring you updates as more verified details come out. If you found this useful, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next update. And let me know in the comments which of these 4 stories you want us to dig into further. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.